Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and we are here at Third Place Books in Lake Forest Park with Lois Leveen, author of The Secrets of Mary Bowser. Lois, welcome to Author.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Lois, this novel is your debut novel, but you come to the world of writing from academia,
Yes.
primarily both as in studying literature and history. Is that right?
Yeah, so my undergraduate work was really, it was a history and literature major, and I fell in love with the literature. That's, I think, what I prefer to read, as many people do. So my graduate work was primarily in literature, but my specialty was African American literature. And obviously, you have to understand the history that literature is being written through and against. And that's how I discovered Mary Bowser. I was doing some of my academic research, reading a book of women's history, 300-page book.
Right.
There are 3 paragraphs on Mary Bowser, and I just was captivated by that story and thought it was an interesting way to talk about some of the same themes that I've been doing in my teaching and my research.
And it is a fascinating story. Any novelist who's inclined towards historical fiction, I'm sure, would have jumped on it. For the viewers who haven't picked up the book yet, in a nutshell, it is the story of a spy, but a very unusual spy.
Yes. So Bowser, who was a real person, was born in slavery, freed, sent north and educated, and made the incredibly unusual choice to come back to the South, and during the Civil War became a spy for the Union by pretending to be a slave in the Confederate White House. So she gave up her freedom in the hopes that it was going to bring freedom for others, but of course this is one of the challenges of historical fiction. We know how the war ends, but the characters don't.
Right.
And so at the moment she made that choice, it was essentially just giving up everything for the hope of who knows what was going to be.
And of course, you had an additional challenge with Mary Bowser in that this is a historical character, barely though, because
Yes.
as you said, there's so little of her. And you surrounded her with real people, here and there, especially in the White House, the
Right.
Confederate White House. But you really had to fictionalize this. This was really just a work of imagination, ultimately.
Yes. Yes, so this is amazing because she's real and yet so very little is known about her. Bet Van Loo, the woman who freed her and who ultimately was part of the spy ring that she was also part of, her life is much better documented. So I had that, and I also had, just as I said, my field was African American literature. So I had a sense of what voice might be like, what some of the themes might be like, but there was also a lot of rich research that was new for me, especially about Richmond, where I think when we talk about slavery, we tend to think about plantation slavery and urban slavery in an industrialized city, which Richmond was, and a city that in some ways was more tied to the North economically and socially than it might have been to some of the other southern cities. It was far different than I imagined.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess, I always say it's a little bit like a puzzle to be solved, taking the facts that you know or the things that are constrained by the historical period and then weaving the story around it. To me, that feels more exciting than just starting with a blank slate and getting to invent everything. I kind of like the having to rub up against what's true or what's known or
Right.
the history.
This is your first published work of fiction,
Yes.
but were you writing fiction secretly or clandestinely up to this point, or was this really
No,
it?
I mean, this is sort of the amazing thing is that
Wow.
I think I took maybe a fiction writing class, one as part of my freshman composition class at college, and probably was intimidated by everybody else and
Sure.
never thought that I was going to write a novel until I found Mary Bowser. I had been a creative writer in other ways. I've written and published poetry and some creative nonfiction, some memoir pieces, but if you had told me the day before I first learned of Mary Bowser, you're going to write a novel, I would have laughed and laughed and laughed.
That's a big leap. The novel
Yes.
is not,
Yes.
usually it's a progression up towards it.
Yes.
And this was really successful in its execution. So what was the biggest sort of challenging surprise you encountered when writing this as someone who hadn't done it at all?
I think really thinking about how character and setting and scene convey these bigger themes, that it had been easy for me in my other kind of writing to talk about the work, whatever I was the point that I was trying to get across. And I have a good friend who's a novelist who said to me when I mentioned that I had this idea of writing this novel, she said, "Oh, you could do it." And I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "I've read your emails. You're a great writer."
Oh.
That's a lot of fantastic advice there.
Yeah.
But she read an early draft and she said to me, "This reads like it's Mary Bowser's thesis." And that's when I knew I had to go back and do more work. So I think figuring out how to really make it about story. One of the advantages of having written poetry is paying a lot of attention to words and even the sounds of words. So I will struggle over a sentence or a paragraph, even just the difference between using the words small and tiny.
Sure.
They mean the same thing, but they
Wow.
sound so different
Yeah.
that even thinking about sounds in that way, that helps to bring in that kind of writing or that kind of background.
So what was the greatest pleasure you found in writing your first novel? Was it the discovery element or was it something else?
You know, the very first time that I read from this publicly, which was months ago, but the novel's only been out for a week at this point, being in a room, and it happened to be this sort of setting where the audience is in the dark, so you can't see, and the light is shining on you, and you have no idea what's happening. And there are moments where people will, or laugh, or whatever, and just realizing that in the same way that I can't see how people are feeling, but I can hear their response, that moment when you realize that this book is going to touch people in that you're never even going to see those
right.
people, it's so amazing and so powerful. And I think particularly, I mean, this is a story about race in America. This is a story about a woman whose contribution is mostly lost to history, and in some ways I hope this book will bring her the kind of attention that she deserves for the things that she did. So I think that it's going to be a particularly important story for people. But anytime you touch somebody and they say, "That moved me," I mean, I gave the Bound Galleys to my lawyer, just, you know, because she's a
Right.
good friend, and
Right.
and he said to me, "I was reading it on the treadmill at the gym and it made me cry. I was so embarrassed to be crying at the gym." And I thought, wow,
Success.
I made a lawyer cry. You know you've done good work.
Absolutely. So this is my last question. What I would like you to do, Lois, is finish this sentence for me. All right? If writing...
I'm a writer, so I hope I can at least finish one sentence.
Everyone does. Everyone finishes it. If writing has taught me anything, it has taught me what?
It's the power of language, not just to touch people, but to transform how they see the world and how they connect with other people. That I think this is obviously a work that is very grounded in a particular historical moment, but that some of it is about what's it like to be a parent when you can't protect your child from everything in the world? What's it like to go from being an insecure girl to a courageous woman? What's it like to be committed to a cause and be in a relationship with somebody who wishes that you would spend a little more time on that relationship than on your cause, right? So that in some ways, what's amazing to me is seeing how it can help people, or how people are connecting with it in a contemporary way, as well as enjoying the historical read. So I think that if this has taught me anything, it is really that the words on the page have such power, and power that, as a writer, obviously is all about how we spend our time, and yet you don't even realize it until it's out in the world doing its work.